Okay, so let me introduce today's host and session on giving permission, led by Coach Kate Powers. Coach Kate is an American Korean born adoptee currently based in Seoul, and she helps trade in self doubt for confidence. She has worked in the mental, emotional health, and healing arts industry for 15 years as a coach, counselor, meditation yoga teacher, and massage therapist. She believes everyone has the power to change their perspective and live from their strengths, not their limits. He is an advocate for self care, self love, and living fully. Pete, thanks so much for leading us today, and I'll pass it to you to get us started on what it means and looks like to give permission.
Hello, everyone. Um, Thanks for being here. It's really great to have this community, this space, especially as we're still in the first part of the new year, and we still have a pandemic looming around. At least I think so. I don't pay attention to the news at all, so I actually have like no idea what's happening in the world related to that. But I think it's something that I have discovered over many years is when you start to make your mental health a priority, it really starts to become natural, just like anything. There's people who wake up at 5 in the morning and they go for a run every day. It becomes such a habit. Um, I always equate how many people before they even get out of bed look at their phone. Um, and I think, gosh, if we could just all do that with our mental health priorities, um, it's we know that humans can um, adopt patterns, habits, addictions, and um, I think it can be the same for mental health. I've experienced that in my own life, so it's always my goal to just um, show other people that it can be possible for others too. So I think it's great that we have each other to even have a second session and to continue the conversation. Um, Something that I wanted to bring up, my topic today is about giving ourselves permission, um, but also something that I have heard a little bit about vaguely for the past year, but then I feel like this has been in the past month. I've seen a little bit more if I catch a news article or two, and I do not catch that many, but I think there has been something more in the news about discrimination and racism, maybe in the US and other countries related to this to the coronavirus, to COVID. And I was curious if anybody has any sharing or input or feelings about that. Also, just to kind of fill me in, because I don't it's really hard to know what's actually happening, especially when, like, TV. I live in Korea. I don't speak Korean. I don't understand it. So like the news will be on and there'll be snippets of the US or some other country. And sometimes I'm always like, well, what's really accurate here? But does anybody have anything just to share, like right out of the gate, about if anyone has thoughts or feelings about what's been happening more recently?
Yeah, I mean, I think heard on CNN that even like Jeremy Lin, he was being called the coronavirus by some of the people like he was playing against, and it just seems to have gone up like exponentially, like in the US and even in Canada actually, like an Aboriginal woman was called Chinese and then she was kind of like harassed.
Yeah, I mean,
it's pretty horrible, what's going on here in the United States regarding, hate crimes and discrimination against Asians. Um, we, especially towards senior citizens, and, like there are some really horrible stories, like in Chinatowns and New York or on the West Coast about, just being attacked. And, being here in the United States, I'm exposed to, seeing a lot of those kind of posts and news about that from people that, like I know, and it really, yeah, it's really horrible. It's really sad. And, but what really brought to light for me was how that this is more than just like, it's not just a result of the coronavirus. It's, this kind of discrimination and racism it's a systematic form of oppression that's been here for a very long time in American history. And it's something for us to really revisit. It's not as doesn't have as much history, such as like, the racism towards, Black Americans. But, we had concentration camps here in the United States, right? That's and that and it's just, it's that racism and hate has been, you know, those are systematic, the source of it was systematic, and it really just like lately I've been thinking a lot about that. And it's really frightening, because I have, parents here who are nearby and they're senior citizens as well. So it's really actually been a big source of pain for me here.
Wow. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It's been interesting. I've seen a little bit on social media lately. More Asians are posting things about, Asian discrimination. And what is so interesting is, since I'm in Korea, um, I see like these posts on Instagram and these photos, and I think, wow, to me, my perception is that Asians in America or Canada, I mean, I can't speak for Canada because I've never lived there, but it's just my perception and it's my personal experience from living in the US that Asians, I'm not speaking for every Asian in America, of course, but there's definitely this more sticking together. Um, for me, when I lived in Washington, D.C., which was very international, diverse, and I had Asian American friends and from several different Asian countries, and it was never a quote problem. Like I never met a Japanese American or a Chinese American or a Vietnamese American who was like, oh, I'm not going to charge you because you're not Japanese American too. And I thought that was so wonderful. And I just got really used to that. I'm not saying that people don't disagree, all humans do, but since living here is definitely more divided. And it's really interesting to witness this and to be in Korea when this is happening in the US and see all of these Asians in America, for example, sticking together. I see Korean Americans, sticking up for people in Chinatown. And not that all people in Chinatown are Chinese anyway, but like I see that a lot. And then here, what I've personally experienced is very, very different. I've had Native Koreans tell me, "Oh, you should really not talk to Chinese people," and just this stuff has actually been happening at the same time that I see a bunch of Asians in America sticking together. So it's fascinating to kind of witness these two things unfolding at the exact same time. And I always wonder, of course, being in Asia, there's much more history that's more at the forefront where, Asians in America are all kind of together. But I always think of it related to a giving permission thing. I equate a lot of things to this giving permission, which I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean by that. But I think the broad meaning for me is we have to be willing to challenge our old patterns and our old beliefs. And we have to be willing to challenge ourselves, what we've been taught, what we've been told. We even have to challenge how we feel about things in history. A lot of people will say, if we use Black Lives Matter as an example, people say, well, this is just history. This is history, and history has created why we treat Black people badly. Or, history has created why this nation doesn't like this nation. And that can be said about many countries. It doesn't mean those things aren't true. But I think if we are going to really make an intentional world and really be intentional with our lives, we have to challenge ourselves and say, okay, so maybe this history shapes this, how Black people are treated, how Asian people are treated. But we have to be willing to challenge that and be one of the people who will stand up and make that change. It's like when people say, well, this is just how we've always done it. So this is just the way it is. But I always think it's the way it is until someone is willing for it to not be that way anymore. Does that make sense? It's like, okay, well, this is how it always is. We take taxis and we take subways. And then someone who wanted to create Uber was like, this is not the way it is anymore. Or we buy books at Borders bookstore until Jeff Bezos is like, well, that's not how we're going to do it anymore. And when we think of like these iconic entrepreneurs, all of them received a lot of just a lot of pushback. I remember reading about the creator of Starbucks, and everyone was like, oh, that's crazy. I mean, no one's going to spend $5 on a cup of coffee. And the Starbucks creator was like, but they will. And so you've got all these people telling you you're crazy for creating Uber. You're crazy for creating a smartphone. You're crazy because it's different, And all of these people who have really changed technology or changed the world were willing to give themselves permission to do something bizarre, to do something crazy, to do something that really broke the mold and disrupted everything. And I see like technology innovation very much the same as how we can progress as people in terms of like social innovation, how we can coexist with each other, is that we also have to give ourselves the permission to do the crazy thing. And crazy is just usually defined as the thing that's different. It doesn't mean that there aren't actually crazy things that maybe are unhealthy. But it's like we have to be willing to be one of the outliers, essentially. And then with time, it catches on, like Uber or a smartphone or Amazon. Does that make sense? That it's about, you have to be able to be willing to kind of stand out a little bit. And I think that that's really what leadership is you have to be willing to do the thing that's different or uncomfortable, or the thing that nobody believes in. I think there's limitations to that. If you're saying, oh, okay, I'm going to be the school shooter, and that's different. Of course, those types of scenarios are different. But when it comes to taking care of ourselves, when it comes to standing up for racism or discrimination. Sometimes we might feel really alone or really isolated, but if we have like this internal permission, we'll just keep going with it. Like when I think, gosh, what did Jeff Bezos go through when he was first starting out? Regardless of your opinion on him himself, I think, wow, he probably went through a lot of people telling him he's totally nuts. And now he probably doesn't care that all of those people told him he was crazy. And so I think it's just very much the same, that we have to be willing to challenge and get clear on what our own moral compass is, and be willing to use that. There's a lot of times that we as people, we just want to stay silent. We don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to upset anybody, which is a lot of times, at least in the US, that's what everyone says. Oh, don't talk about religion. Don't talk about politics. Don't talk with your friends about politics. That's a little bit, to me, kind of one of those old archaic patterns. I say, if you can't talk to your friends about politics or religion, what kind of friendship is that really? That you can't talk about something that impacts everyone in some way. I don't think it means we have to agree with everyone. We don't have to agree with all of our friends. We don't even have to have the same viewpoints. But if we can't even have conversations with our friends about something like politics or race, it's really not a surprise to me why we have the whole world and different countries literally blowing up over these big topics, because we haven't even practiced, or we've been told we should not practice having these kinds of conversations with people we know and care about. So it's no wonder that people on social media or out on the streets in protests and riots are literally killing each other, shooting each other, because we won't even talk to people we care about these things. So it's like, to me, it's like we have to start somewhere. First, we have to give ourselves permission to do it. And then we have to be willing to do it, which is going to be uncomfortable. But it's like a practice. You ride your bike, you get better. You learn a language, you get better. And over time, maybe we will be more practiced with talking about these things: mental health, race, politics, so that it doesn't result in a bunch of people on social media who don't even know each other just like shooting off like terrible words. You're a terrible person because you don't agree with my politics. Oh, you should die because you don't like the politicians I like. Like, when did we become so terrible as humans that we just do that to each other on social media? Does that make sense? That was kind of a lot of words, so I'll just pause in case anyone has any thoughts or anything they want to share.
Oh, I think you make some really great points, Kate. And definitely resonates with me because I think this is important, a great, preface to what I plan on talking about in the next, series is authenticity. And, it always begins with an itch, and an itch that you just can't seem to scratch, but you want to. But I think you're giving really great advice, is that, really you have to make a decision, the decision to give yourself permission, and it always starts with that. So yeah, like I think that's really great that you're bringing this up, and I absolutely agree with you. It really begins with you and giving yourself that permission first. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, well, I don't, if anyone else would like to share anything. Anyone? I think what is striking to me, I've felt this way for a long time, is many years ago, I grew up in Missouri and in St. Louis, in a really small town of a bunch of white people. And years ago, I was raised in a Catholic grade school and high school. And it was all of these nuns, and they were, you know, you must do this and you must do this. And if you don't, you're going straight to hell. But God loves you no matter what. And it was very confusing to me because I thought, wow, I'm getting all of these messages that God or Jesus is all loving, but you must exactly act this certain way. It felt very black and white. You say a cuss word, you might go to hell. You do this, you're going to go to hell. But God will always forgive you. And so to me, growing up in a Catholic school, I thought, well, I'm going to hell, but God will always forgive me. If he always will forgive me, why am I going to hell because I made a mistake? That always perplexed me. And I guess this was around my senior year in high school. I started getting really interested in Eastern religion and Eastern philosophy. And I would go to Borders bookstore and I would buy a bunch of books about Buddhism and Taoism and meditation. And being a Korean born person, but growing up in Missouri with a white family, I pictured, because I didn't know anything about Asia really at all before the internet, I pictured everyone in Asia to be like these like Buddhist monks or something. Like that was sort of this romanticized idea that I had. I thought, wow, I bet everyone in Asia is just really calm like the Dalai Lama, and everyone is just peaceful and loving and meditating all the time. That wasn't entirely accurate, but that's really the perception that I had. But it was through my pursuits in Buddhism and a lot of reading books by the Dalai Lama and stuff that I realized every message was about looking within. It was about look within, look within, look within. And then I started looking for themes that matched through these other religions. And at the end of the day, for me, I discovered, okay, you've got various religions and people are going to agree or disagree, however they will over time. But really, to me, it became more important to look at the underlying message. And it doesn't really matter to me now if it's coming from Jesus or a rapper or Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. Like there's a lot of people and figures today and in history that have these messages. You can call them spiritual messages or not, but just messages about how we should live, how we should treat each other, how we should treat ourselves. And to me, today I don't really get too hung up in who it came from. If I hear something that maybe was quoted in the Bible, I'm going to take that. It doesn't mean that I'm, strictly Catholic or not. It means that I'm more focused on the message. I digress. When I was doing a bunch of study about Buddhism and meditation, everything was look within. Fast forward to today. I think we have become a society, I think we have become a world that is, everything's external. What's going to make me happy? If I travel, if I get that job, if I get that promotion, if I have this, if I have that, it's always something that we have to attain outside of ourselves. So that also means if we don't attain it, our happiness is directly tied to that. I didn't get that promotion. I'm not happy. I didn't get that house. I'm not happy. I didn't get this. I didn't get that. And I always come back to these Eastern philosophies of look within, look within. We also do that with other people. We say things like this: the world really needs to change. Gosh, the world is so bad. Coronavirus, racism, education, gun control, everything is a mess. Something really needs to change. And sometimes we sit back and we read the news and we engage on social media or not on social media, and we say, wow, something really has to change. They really need to change. The politics, the politicians, the government, the school system, the racism, they need to change. They need to change. That's also external. And I always, every time I see this playing out in the news or whatever, I think, but actually, we need to look within. It's very easy for us as people to identify and pinpoint when someone else is doing something wrong, which is why we have this cancel culture right now. Oh, they made one mistake. We're done with them. Let's ruin them forever. I'm not saying there isn't a time or place for that. I think that's a spectrum. This cancel culture of this person did something, they're done. I think we have a spectrum. Are we talking about Harvey Weinstein, or are we talking about someone else who could be making a mistake, but really actively working on trying to better themselves? Because at the end of the day, when we're dealing with these really complex and really layered topics that have lots of opinions and lots of variables, there's going to be a lot of gray area. So it's very hard to just be like, wow, they made one mistake, done with them. Like if we apply that to everyone, then we're all out, right? Because every one of us has the same capability to be that person who's been racist, that person who's been a bully. We may have been doing it ourselves at some point. And it doesn't always mean that we made that remark or we made that comment. It doesn't always mean it's because we're a racist jerk, or it doesn't always mean that. Sometimes it's a response to someone else. So I think it's too gray to just say, oh, everyone else needs to change. I think what it really needs to be about is that we turn the light on ourselves and we say, how can I change? Someone has a question. How can I change? How can I be what I want to see in the world? Instead of taking a little bit more of a passive approach, oh, the news, the world needs to change, but I'm just going to keep doing everything the same, which is actually what I think most people are doing. If you ask anyone in America, how are things going right now? I feel like most people will be like, oh, it's a little bit of a mess and it needs to change. I don't mean that we can all have power of a president, but I mean, little by little, if we're all willing to instead say, how can I contribute to this change? How can I be this change? How can I give myself permission to be the person who stands up and does something different? That's really what I mean overall by giving permission. But I think that giving permission starts with turning inward. Instead of saying everything needs to change, that may be true, but really it's more about how can I change my behaviors, maybe big, maybe small. What can I do to be the change that I really want to see in the world? And know that at first, people might call me crazy. People might think I'm weird. But it's actually probably what most people also want. And it takes a little bit of time and a little bit of adjustment for people to get used to the fact that now there's a smartphone, or now we order our books online, or now we order an Uber. That takes a little bit of an adjustment time. So if you're the person out there going, standing up or speaking out for Asian racism, or if you're the person out there going, I prioritize my mental health. And at first people are like, oh, okay, yeah, you're weird. Eventually, you say that to that person however many times, they're like, okay, maybe I'll think about it. Maybe I'll try Uber. Maybe I'll try to order books online. Maybe I'll try to prioritize my mental health too. And little by little by little, it starts to like spread around. So I tell Alice, I prioritize my mental health. And she's like, okay, cool, good for you. It could be a month later. It could be a year later. It could be 10 years later. It could be an hour later. Then she's like, actually, that's okay. I'm going to try it. So then she starts doing it. Then she tells her friend Mark. And then Mark's like, oh, okay, you guys have like a mental health club. Cool. And then over time, he starts to realize that there's this new thing to him. Maybe it's Uber, maybe it's mental health. And then he's like, okay, I'm going to try it. And then Mark starts telling people. It's not about how many I agree with you can you collect, but it's about starting something little by little, knowing that if you are standing for it, if you are giving yourself permission, it's like subconsciously, sometimes consciously too, it's subconsciously giving the people around you permission to do the same. Because people are gonna, they're like, oh wow, Mark, he really prioritizes his mental health, or he really prioritizes speaking out over racism or whatever it is. And then over time, there's going to be some people that think, well, I can do that too. And there's going to be a lot of people that are like, I have been wanting to do that too. And then do you see how over time it starts to multiply? And that's how big things change. They're not always good, but that's how things start to change. So it's not about waiting, oh, I really need gun reform and education reform and healthcare reform. It's more about, I need to be the person. And I need to be the person knowing I might be that outlier. I feel like an outlier every single day here. As a Korean-born American in Korea, every day, it's like, I feel like every day I'm kind of like this warrior where I'm going to be like, okay, another day, Kate, you're going to stick to your boundaries. You're going to stick to your values. There's going to be people who try to shoot them down, and you're going to do it. And I have had people here say to me, okay, sometimes you like scare me a little because you're just like so bold about things. And that's not really the way we do things here. And I say, well, I can really only be me. You can really only be you. And I respect if you do things differently. But I think, why don't we try something new? Doesn't mean you have to take it into your own life, but it also doesn't mean I'm going to compromise who I am. Just because I'm living in a culture that doesn't want to speak up about anything. and just because I've trained myself over time to be a person who does. So sometimes it's like a total clash, but I still do it anyway. It's not always easy, but every day it's about giving myself a permission to really, I always say be the change. So every day it's about giving yourself permission to really do the things or get the things that you want in life. I always say, are you just kind of passively going through life as a victim of circumstance? Or are you in the driver's seat and you are making a decision? It doesn't mean there's definitely going to be things out of your control. Of course, there's a global pandemic that's been going on for a year, out of your control. But at the end of the day, are you in the driver's seat of your life? Or are you just kind of letting it, like, are you just sitting in the back seat going, all these things are happening and I don't have a say in it? Oh, sorry, I think I muted myself. I was going to check the question. If anybody has any thoughts, any input, anything to share, please feel free. There's a question in the chat box. What would be something I recommend that we can all do to address the racist acts that are happening to the Asian community? I think you're mostly talking about maybe Asian discrimination in the US. I've had this come up in my life a lot. To address this question, 3 years ago, I came back to Korea for a visit from the US. I hadn't been here in about 9 years. So I really had a different perspective. The last time I had been to Korea, I was much younger. So I was in Korea and Thailand and where else? Taipei and Shanghai. And so I got a very, very small sampling of Shanghai, just a couple of days, Taipei, just a couple of days, Chiang Mai, Thailand, about a week, and then a couple of weeks in Korea. And I came back to the US. I was living in Chicago, and I had this urge to look at myself. So really what I did, this is something I would recommend we can all do. Same thing as I said before, it's about looking within. I got back from Asia. I realized, wow, I live in this primarily white neighborhood in Chicago. There's probably 10% Asian, 10% Indian. That's my neighborhood. What does that mean for me? And looking within, questioning yourself with the hard questions. How have I contributed to racism? How have I benefited from this or this or this? I sat down and I looked at all of those things within myself because I always want to look within instead of point fingers. Okay, you did this and you did this. Fine. That's not great. I'm not condoning that behavior. But if we were all willing to say, but how have I maybe done something similar? And where does that come from? Why did I do that? What's fueling that behavior? And how can I actively work to untangle it? So actually what I did after I got back from Asia 3 years ago and was like, oh, wow, I live in this like pretty white neighborhood. Should I move to a different neighborhood? So I did. I actually moved pretty abruptly because I wanted to challenge any internalized racism that I have. And so I moved to this very Asian neighborhood in Chicago. It was actually, it's known to be this Asian / Black neighborhood. And I thought I'm going to move there so I can look at my own self in a different way. It doesn't mean that I recommend that every single person out there moves to a different neighborhood just so they can challenge like any internalized racism they have. But it was truly an act of going, it was actually this neighborhood that had this reputation of being like the bad neighborhood. People would joke like, "Oh, I don't want to move to that neighborhood. I might get shot." Or, um, is that the ghetto? Is that the ghetto for Black people and the Asian immigrants? And I had friends, including non-white friends, who were like, "Oh, you should not move to that neighborhood." And I'm like, why? Because we have like this socially constructed reputation that it's bad. Um, and I had an Asian American friend who was like, don't move to that neighborhood. It's probably really dangerous. But how much of that could be true? And how much of that could just be in this story that we keep playing out, that we keep alive because of our own fear? Like, so I moved to that neighborhood. My Asian American friend is in the car with me, and there was do you know Sonic? It's like a drive-through burger place. They have cherry limeades. I was like, we're gonna go to this Sonic. My Asian American friend next to me was like, I don't really think we should drive in there. I think that we might get shot. And I'm like, I think that there is a small likelihood that that could happen because there's actual factual data that these things do happen in this neighborhood. But I also think some of that is your own internalized fear. Like, I don't know if this Sonic drive-through would have stayed in business for this long. There's cars, there's people. I said, so we're going. This needs to be an act of us busting through our own stories in our head that contribute to racism. So we went to Sonic, we got cherry limeades, and she's like, I just really don't think that this is a good idea. And I thought, well, if this is how we're gonna live our lives, constantly in fear, it's no wonder that racism only gets worse instead of better. And I said to her, I said, you're an Asian American. This is known for being the one of the primary Asian neighborhoods in Chicago. There are tons of businesses here. Um, there are tons of restaurants here. Some of them are probably going to Sonic. Doesn't mean it couldn't be risky, but like, who are you to say that you're better than? Like, you can't go to Sonic even though there's all these Asians with businesses in this neighborhood. Like, and so I said to her, I said, how is our own internalized racism playing out here? And we went to Sonic. So I think that's a long-winded way of saying that there are all things that we can examine in ourselves. And that will also help be, that's also how we can help be part of the solution, not the problem. I think someone else has a question. Did someone else have a question? No? Okay. Any thoughts? Does this make sense? Probably like kind of two things. We have to give ourselves permission to, quote, be the change. Then we have to be willing to do it, knowing that it's not always going to be easy, knowing that some people are going to say Uber's a really bad idea. Selling books online is stupid, and we have to do it anyway. Question? Anyone have a question?
Oh yeah. How do I lower my hand? Okay. Yeah, actually, what was I going to say? Oh, I think, well, wait, hey, can I ask you, what is your like background or your training?
Training.
Yeah,
Oh,
you
like
said you're like a personal what did you say? It was personal coach or a therapist?
yes, I was a licensed counselor in the US. I worked in a psychiatric hospital, like acute locked unit psychiatric hospital for several years, about 6 years. At the time I was a counselor and I was considering pursuing psychiatry in the medical field. Personally, I saw a lot of medications, of course, working in a hospital. I saw a lot of medications And I thought, wow, I don't think being a psychiatrist, medical doctor is for me.
Mhm.
Long story short, that's how I started getting into these more natural. I was doing talk therapy with patients and group therapy with patients. And I started incorporating like meditation and yoga. And so then I studied meditation and yoga and massage therapy. And then I went to a life coaching school.
Yeah. So I have okay. So maybe because we're both in Korea, maybe we can beat up if you're down for it. But I can tell by the way you talk about things that you're just more open. So like I also worked in psychiatric research for 3 years after graduating college. And you know, like psychiatry, even in the medical field among doctors, is probably the lowest in the on the hierarchy. So like when I would talk to my doctor friends, two of them who happen to be Asian American, as soon as I mentioned psychiatry, they say, "Oh no, I would never even consider doing that," because they're considered like not real doctors. But if you've worked in psychiatry, you know that you have to have a thick skin to survive there. It's not easy work. And then like asking these questions about introspection and reflecting on yourself, it's usually a slow burn and a difficult process because your patients won't always be honest in the beginning. Like, you know, if you have some dermatological issue, like the patient wants to get it fixed right now, and they say, I'm having all these symptoms and I need it fixed. But with a psychiatric patient, because of the stigma, it's gonna be a slower process. You have to be more patient, right? So like, frankly, for me, after working 3 years and like meeting so much resistance among my friends and my parents and basically everybody that I know, not working psychiatry, I got burnt out, and I was like, I can't do this by myself. I know I'm not by myself, but I feel like I'm by myself. Which was maybe one of the factors was like a racial thing because I didn't know that many Asian Americans in the field at the time, right? But yeah, I think your comments about like progress and like I guess incremental change, that's a very wise approach because it lets you to allows you to keep boundaries, right? Um, yeah. So I want to say that, but then also uh, in towards the beginning of your talk, oh, you're talking about like being outspoken, right? So I know that people in this Zoom meeting have different backgrounds. Some are adopted and others are not. But for me, I grew up with Korean American parents, and I've been like thinking about these questions a lot. And so, in my household, you know, if I asked my dad to have a conversation, he would say in Korean, 말이 많다, which means you have many words, which basically means you talk a lot, right? And so like it's not something that was encouraged in my house. And actually, I'm gonna put two names in the chat box. So they're both tenured law professors. One is Harvard and one is Yale. I think both of them were the first or among the first Asian Americans tenured professors of law. But like I watched their talks and they both said that they had those challenges as Asian Americans with Asian parents, that like going into the legal profession, they had to unlearn like what they learned in the house, right? So even though they had the chops, they had the ability to like lawyer, they had to like retrain themselves psychologically about how to be outspoken and use the law, I guess, in a more American style. And I think like for people who grew up, I guess, with Asian American parents, a big challenge is like learning to unlearn what we were taught. But the thing, it's hard because like I think what we were taught in our households worked in Asia for them. It worked. Like if you grew up in a dictatorship, you know, keeping quiet probably helped you survive, right? But that's not going to be beneficial for you in American democracy necessarily. So I think about those things a lot, and like I get really tired because I feel like I have to be two different people constantly at the same time, and at some point I always feel mistranslated. So like it's a lot of energy for me to switch it on and off, and like I constantly have to assess like my audience, which I think everyone does to an extent, but for me like I get tired. And so for me, like when I see the news about these Asian American attacks, like of course it's horrible. But at the same time, I have like this existential question about like, do I want to deal with that for the rest of my life? And is that what my life is really about? And then like, why did my family come to America? I do have those questions, and they're hard ones. But anyway, that's my, I was gonna say 2 cents, but my 5 cents. Yes, I said a lot.
I got a question for you.
Yeah.
When you said you asked yourself the question, do I want to deal with that for the rest of my life? Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, hold on. Let me just turn on my camera so you're not talking to a still face. Hold on. It's just tiring. I feel like without saying too much, I have other things going on in my life. So I'm sure you guys are familiar with the term intersectionality, right? So we have intersecting identities, and I have those issues to deal with. And so like I feel like by coming to Asia, I can control one factor or one variable. And then it lets me see other things clearly about my own personal life, right? But when I'm in America, I mean, living in America, we are all obligated to live across difference and understand difference. But to be perfectly honest, America is a very cognitively demanding place to live. And I feel like people are not honest about it. If we say like, oh, I can't handle it, it's too much, if it sounds like complaining. But I feel like, yeah, it is exhausting. Like basically people who I've had deep conversations with, like they all say like, I'm exhausted by this, not because they don't see the injustice. It's maybe because they don't know how to set their own boundaries, right? Or maybe they haven't found their own safe space. And especially like these days with American politics, where like we're getting so tribal, maybe people are afraid to say like, I need a safe space too, as a Black person or a white person or Asian or whatever, right? So like I feel like people just have like things pent up and they have nowhere to release it. And this is why I'm very pro psychiatry, because psychiatry's principle is like very, it respects confidentiality a lot, especially because of stigma. So like Kate, I tried to push that message out there in like micro doses. Like, do you ever consider talking to someone in a legally protected space? Or but yeah, I don't know if I want to deal with constantly proving I'm American, but also the thing that's more unique about America is that we have a gun culture there, right? So like sometimes speaking up might result in your death, like especially if you're a Black American person, if you say something wrong. So like living in Korea, like I don't think about that ever. And it's not like, oh, I'm boasting. It's just like, yeah, here in East Asia, there's other types of issues for sure, like everywhere in the world, but there's no guns here, right? So like that, yeah, it seems bizarre looking from the outside. Like people have to worry about that, I think, on a daily basis. So I think it's not just the racism, it's like racism plus gun violence, and then if you're a victim, having to prove if it was a biased crime or not. You know what I mean? It's pretty demanding. I know that was a long-winded answer, but I think that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, no, I was just curious because I am also Korean American, raised by Korean parents, living currently in the United States. So I was just curious what you meant by that, because for myself, like I am petrified, and I told my friends, I was like, some have reached out to me and asked me what they could do. And I said, honestly, can you please speak on our behalf? I'm too tired. I'm too scared. So,
You asked someone else to speak on your behalf?
yeah, just say, please keep sharing about us. Please keep talking about us. Please protect us,
Yeah.
because honestly, like I'm so scared. Like I'm so petrified. And so like for when the news started coming out about the attacks on Asian Americans, I was completely aware, but I like mentally, I just kind of checked out for about a couple of weeks because
Mm,
I couldn't deal with that, at the time. And
mhm,
then, my partner is not Korean, so he asked me, so how are you doing? What can I
mhm,
do to help you during this time, as well? How's that going? And I said, I don't know. I don't want
mhm,
to think about it. And I think that even just like me saying that, there's like feelings of shame and guilt come up because I'm like, I should think about it because, I'm Asian American and I should speak up and stuff like
mhm.
that. But like I can definitely relate to what you're saying. Like it's so much. It's so much, you
It is,
know? So
yeah, it's a lot. I mean, I don't know if this will help you, but I I actually find Steven Yeun, I think that's how you pronounce his name, the Walking Dead guy.
yeah,
When I
Stephen Yoon,
watch,
yeah.
yeah, I actually I find his interviews to be quite helpful because it's pretty clear
Mm,
that the cinematic work he does is leaning more towards Korea, right? And he has a way of like presenting himself where he can play to both sides. So I read like
mm,
some article and said like when I was young, I decided that in America that when I go to school and whatever, I have to put on sort of a facade. But when I go to my Korean church or on the weekends, I'm just gonna be myself. And so it shows that he had those struggles too, right? And
mhm,
he's probably tapping into what a lot of Asian Americans feel about having this duality, right? And
mm,
I don't know if this will help you, but for me, well, I haven't really gone deep into it, but I started studying a little about war in East Asia.
mm,
It's a really hard, it's hard literature to read, but I think on a macro perspective, Asian Americans are kind of seen as war products, right?
mm,
We were adopted to America, or we immigrated to escape dictatorship, or the U.S. Army is still in South Korea. These things are part of everyday life. But I think
mhm.
because I was raised in America, the only history I studied was like Hitler, and slavery. Like all the bad stuff happens only in Europe and America, right? So
Sure.
we don't. The
It's
Korean War was
very,
like
yeah.
one paragraph,
I mean,
but
it's
there's
very Western centric. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
so like I reading that literature, it's hard for me because like then I have to really confront why my parents might have immigrated. Those are the real reasons, and they never talked about that kind of stuff. But I think we have to
That's
own it. We have to own it because like we do have a very long history, right? What we're living right now is
yeah.
like the modern world, but like there's a lot of stuff going on in Asia that we probably as Asian Americans just don't know about because we weren't taught it.
So in the interest of time, I'm going to pause here and say thank you to Kate. And we hope that this has been inspiring to you to give permission to be and do something different um, in any time, whether there's strange times or not. And thank you for continuing to join us and being part of our discussion. We'll be continuing the series with part 3 next month with Kyla leading us in talking about grieving. And we have other events coming up under a new series called #Universal Asian Voices. So you can sign up for those as well. And most of those are going to be paid, but I'll put the links to the shop, and I will also put a link to our YouTube channel, which is where all the videos for the events will be happening. So, of course, we can stay on, but I'm going to officially end it here. And please, in the next few days, please check your emails. I will send a survey it'll come through Eventbrite, but I'll send a survey so that you can give us feedback about these events so that we can adjust them so that you get the most out of them. So until next time, be safe and be well. Thank you.